Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 23rd of January 2024. Let's start before our aid section with just returning to the strikes on Ukraine from last night and just reminding ourselves of what Russia are doing. This is Kharkiv. I'm not going to play you the video because I get in trouble, but this is Kharkiv and this is a ballistic missile just hitting residential area, and that's not been shot down by Ukrainian air defenses. That's just slamming in to Kharkiv. A moment when a Russian ballistic missile hit the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv this morning. It's not cool. Russia struck Kharkiv with a Kh-22 missile, large anti-ship missile known for its low accuracy and carrying a nearly 1-ton warhead. This war crime is especially cynical following Russia's UN statements yesterday about brotherly nations. It just slams into a residential area. I mean, what's the UN doing? Why are Russia still being entertained as on that stage? Why are they still being given a platform? Why does Lavrov get to say the despicable things he says in relation to, they all sound very nice, but if you're saying that at the same time as you're releasing missiles into Ukrainian cities to smash residential areas, that then becomes a disgusting thing to say. Anyway, military aid. Right, moving on to start with Poland. So Donald Tusk, the Polish leader, it has been in Kyiv. He was there yesterday. Zelensky announced a new defense package from Poland. This is interesting because some people have seen a slowdown in aid from Poland. Poland has been a massive supporter of Ukraine. The ruling government, PIS, although they were kind of anti-EU, they're very pro-Ukraine. They're anti-Russia. So no matter who you are in Poland, or most political parties and politicians are anti-Russia due to the Poland's history and context. But it's been quite a difficult election period where PIS have lost rulership. They got the most votes, but they couldn't form a coalition. They didn't get over 50%. So a minority coalition formed with people who could work together, led by Donald Tusk. But that's been mired in issues with the outgoing government and judiciary, so on and so forth. And what that has meant is that Ukraine has been put a little bit on a back burner while they sorted all sorts of nuts stuff going on inside Poland. But eventually Donald Tusk has got himself to Kyiv, and his rhetoric was immensely strong. So he says there is a new Polish defense package. This is Zelensky, sorry, we'll come on to what Tusk says in a minute. A new Polish defense package. We appreciate your continued help. There is a new form of our cooperation for the sake of a larger scale of weapons purchases for Ukrainian needs. This is a Polish loan for Ukraine. The possibility of future joint production of weapons was also discussed with the Prime Minister today. Thank you for supporting Ukraine. So that's what Zelensky said. Now, we'll see what the package entails further forward. We'll return to Poland when we get to the geopolitical section to talk about what Donald Tusk said. Now, this is very good. Thank you, Belgium. I know I've got Belgian viewers. I've spoken to a number of you before. There is a frustration among those pro-Ukrainian Belgians that Belgium has not done enough, especially as a Western nation that is, not poor compared to other nations around the world. And importantly, it has a very vibrant defense industry, as far as I understand. It's now coming to the table with a €611 million military aid package for 2024, according to Ukrainian Defense Minister Umerov. It's really good news. Thank you, Belgium. Better late than never, I guess. NATO has signed a contract worth $1.2 billion worth of artillery shells. Now, I don't know how NATO works for funding and stuff like this. People talk to me before, asking me the questions like, why aren't NATO providing shells for Ukraine? And the way I understand it is NATO doesn't own shells. It's not like NATO as an organization is mainly people in offices, right? That's bringing together nations around the world in a pact, right? And all of the nations that are in NATO run NATO. It's not like these are separate people that are not members of of any other nation. Whether it be Jens Stoltenberg is head of NATO, but he's not. It's not a separate country or anything. He's someone from a NATO nation that is in a position of power and that rotates and so on and so forth. So it's not like NATO has its own army. It's that NATO draws from other people's armies and creates a cooperative force. And so it doesn't have like massive amounts of equipment that NATO would then give. It's like NATO members give their equipment on behalf of the pressuring of NATO as an organization. But it appears that it can do things like this. So it signed a contract for $1.2 billion worth of artillery shells. So Jens Stoltenberg and the alliance's procurement chief, Stacey Cummings, concluded on January the 23rd contracts for the purchase of around 220,000 155mm artillery shells. The NATO Support and Procurement Agency concluded the deal on behalf of allies who will either pass shells to Ukraine or use them to refill their own arsenals. So again, that is facilitating other nations providing kind of on behalf of NATO equipment, in this case 155mm shells, to Ukraine, or backfilling their own depleted stocks that they have given to Ukraine. So I'm not sure that clarifies anything, because I'm not 100% sure exactly how that works. Hungary will not participate in financing the supply of arms to Ukraine at the expense of the funds of the European Peace Fund, but it cannot and does not want to interfere with other countries in this matter. So on January 22nd, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Economic Relations of Hungary, Peter Szijjártó, announced this to journalists following the results of the meeting of the heads of foreign affairs of the member countries of the organisation. In other words, we're not going to fund it, but you guys can go and do what you want. This kind of leads to a separate, 26-nation help for Ukraine. I wonder where Slovakia is going to fit in. European Union is progressing with plans to apply a windfall tax to the profits generated by frozen Russian central bank assets. This is really good, while opting not to seize the immobilized money outright. It will be discussed by the bloc's ambassadors later this week. So instead of taking Russian frozen assets and either turning them into liquid cash, or it depends whether that is cash itself or money in banks, instead of taking that and giving that to Ukraine, that is generating profits that they are then going to seize as a windfall tax. So it's going to be about producing legal frameworks that don't provide Russia the opportunity to come back and hit the EU later, or any nation. This is why the UK has been reticent to do something like this. The US is a big fan of doing this, but the reason it hasn't been done already is because people are worried about legally what happens. So I guess if you can create a special windfall tax and say, well, this money's in Europe, and we now have a European windfall tax whereby if this money is in this particular way, blah, 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 then it qualifies as to be taxed by the EU. And the EU then goes, sorry about that, we now have this tax and that's in the EU, so we're going to have that money. Thank you very much. All the profits that are generated off that. So this is a windfall profit tax. And we've created a tax so that it only really refers to this kind of money. This is how I would interpret that. This is complete speculation, but it's not like we're not going to steal it. We are creating an EU tax for this particular type of money. Oh, look, that type of money fulfills the criteria for this tax, and we'll take a large proportion of the profits of the windfall tax. It just so happens to be 80% tax. Well, I don't know. But they then take that and then give that to Ukraine. So it's not going to be as wide-ranging, but I guess it's sustainable in a way. So, that money will still be frozen and generating profits, and we'll just skim those profits off and give them to Ukraine. So it's maybe a more sustainable model, although it won't be as much to give to Ukraine. Anyway, that's my JP's interpretation. This Colby Badwa, who is Canadian, says they're all not a fan of his Trudeau government. He's something of a conservative. This will be the first Ukraine defense contact group, although this is about the US contact group, where the United States shows up empty-handed. Actually, he's not a fan of Biden. Usually they are pressing allies to do more. Now Biden is doing the cupboard is bare routine, and the Europeans have to delivered more aid to Ukraine than the US now too. So I think the stats are now showing that basically the EU has provided more aid. Just I think possibly as a whole now. So it used to be just in the last 4 months and this and that, or but I have a feeling that now the EU has really stepped up, and Germany's come to the table with an awful lot. And you've got Belgium, you've got UK, you got France now saying a bit, Italy saying, so on and so forth. The US really is down, not just in terms of GDP, but I think possibly in real terms as well. I might be wrong. I did see some stats yesterday, but again, that was referring to Kiel Institute up to the 31st of October. And it's been like November, December, and January has not looked good for the US. Obviously, they've done nothing effectively apart from a bit of drawdown in December. The idea being that actually the US are now not the biggest provider of aid, even though they have the biggest stocks and the largest GDP, etc., and even in terms of purchasing parity and all that kind of stuff. Okay. There appears to be a Ukraine Defense Contact Group. So this is the Ramstein kind of thing. So it's a virtual meeting that's being hosted tomorrow. So that could well be today, actually. But don't expect any new announcements or announcements of new aid for Ukraine. So the quote is, I don't think anyone is under the impression that we're going to get the contact group, going to the contact group with some large deliverable. And of course, the US stuck in this situation where there's this impasse in Congress and can't go to that meeting and say, well, yeah, we're going to deliver a whole load of stuff, which is what they'd normally done, and then trying to G everyone else up to do stuff. Now everyone's going to be G'ing up the US and say, well, come on, where's your aid type thing? So it's an interesting bit of a switch going on there. Now, Jürgen Naudit said, today I contacted the manufacturer of Taurus. Of course, not all questions could be answered, but here are the most important facts. Germany is providing over 600 Taurus. What? Don't get ahead of yourselves. Trying to work this out. That means a translation of that is wrong. So he means to say Germany has over 600 Taurus, 300 of which are ready for use and could be given to Ukraine immediately. 300 would have to be modernized. The request for modernization was made to the federal government several times, but there was no response. So the manufacturer said, can we modernize these 300 Taurus? And the government had gone, can we modernize these Taurus? And the government had gone, are there any repeat orders from the federal government? No, none. Has the issue of reducing the range been discussed with the manufacturer? Yes, but here too, there was no order. The decision remains open. So the government, interestingly, have asked about the range. So that means that the range issue was an issue. Like the range, the fact that you could fire it into Russia with consummate ease was a problem for the German government, but nothing was done about that. Olaf Scholz is betraying Ukraine, says Naudit, and putting the security of Germany and all of Europe at risk. So what's really frustrating here is that the manufacturers are both willing and able to do whatever the government want, but the government haven't said anything. So they haven't put orders in. So even if they are going to give, well, it's just not looking like Germany are looking to give Taurus at all, because they would have put things in place. They would have at least had this conversation with the manufacturers to say, oh, can you put production on alert, or can we put an order in just in case we do? It's just, tumbleweed. Cody Badwa now speaking about his own Canadian government. 2 years into the war in Ukraine, the Trudeau government still hasn't announced any new contracts or investments for 155mm artillery ammunition production. This is Ukraine's single most important need, and the Prime Minister is neglecting it. And this is after Prime Minister Trudeau said, we stand united with Ukraine and the Ukrainians who are persisting valiantly and tirelessly in their fight against Russian aggression, and as they mark the day of unity in Ukraine, I want to be clear, our support for them will never waver. And obviously Badwa saying, yeah, but what about artillery ammunition? And speaking of ammunition, this is a little piece in CNN that goes towards this idea that, Ukraine is screwed for ammunition. Ukraine's ammo shortage is becoming more difficult by the day. Around Bakhmut, an M109 position, so this is a howitzer, says the current ratio is 10-1 in favour of the Russians. So that M109 position we visited only got smoke rounds. The division commander says the current ratio is 10-1 in favour of the Russians. Still, Ukrainian troops are holding on. I presume that means 10-1 in terms of fire rate. And that was, last time it was 10,000 to 2,000. That sounds like it's now 10,000 to 1,000. So it's gone from 5-1 to 10-1. And that is not good for the Ukrainians. To have a Paladin, to have a self-propelled gun only being able to fire smoke rounds is not good enough. German aid to Ukraine says currently a spokesperson from the German MOD couldn't confirm a German contribution to the 60 Caesar howitzers that needs to be financed for Ukraine. So this was the news the other day that Ukraine are going to get, or at least France are manufacturing 78 Caesar self-propelled howitzers, 6 of which have been financed by the Ukrainians themselves. So they're buying 6, and that's 72. And is it 12? Maybe 12 France are procuring themselves, and then the other 60 are being financed by Europeans, but Germany has not made any confirmation there. They are, however, increasingly calling on the framework agreements for ammunition production. And his own comment is that Germany has several framework contracts with Rheinmetall, Deal Defense, Nano AS, unknown French manufacturer, through which ammunition is supplied to Ukraine. Most recently, a framework agreement was concluded in December with an unknown, probably Nexter, French manufacturer, for the supply of 350,000 shells of 155mm ammunition, 68,000 shells for 278 million euros. And that's already been called up by Germany. Germany will supply Ukraine with a total of over 200,000 shells of 155mm ammunition this year. Contracts have also already been concluded for 2025. Spokesperson for the German MOD also said, in addition to the call-up from framework agreements, they are preparing individual measures. So there's lots of things that the Germans are doing. So, okay, Taurus doesn't look too cool, but actually they might be involved in the acquisition of Caesars, but they're certainly involved in ramping up artillery ammunition production. Now we're going to RBC Ukraine reporting on a UK ambassador unveiling details of drone production for Ukraine. So recently we had the £2.5 billion package, which I think is at 3.2 billion US dollars, aid package for Ukraine. Drones for Ukraine, for which Britain allocated out of that £200 million, will be produced on the territory of both countries, according to a statement made by British Ambassador to Kiev Martin Harris in an interview with the European Pravda. Quote, drones are to be manufactured in cooperation with the military-industrial complex of our two countries. Ukraine currently has a significant advantage, extensive experience in drone usage. Therefore, there is great interest from both the UK and other countries in how we can collaborate with you in the production of drones here in Ukraine and our countries, said the ambassador. He also firmly responded to the question of whether drones would be produced in Ukraine and the UK. However, Harris did not specify the exact quantity of drones in question. And he noted that the production process is just beginning and there are different classes of drones. Quote, but I think this will be one of the most promising elements of our cooperation in the defence industry. Now, this is one of those things that will be super useful for the UK. This won't just be charity to Ukraine, of course. I talk about this all the time, but actually drones is a really interesting area because the UK has got a troubled history with drone procurement, and we're working really spending a lot of money on these massive drones like the Reaper drones, but actually they, as we can see from this war, aren't quite as important as a shed load of much smaller drones that can do all sorts of crazy stuff. And when it comes to us helping, or any country helping Ukraine, there will be production in the UK that will obviously bring money into the UK and put money into the economy and stimulate the economy, tax revenue, etc., etc. There'll also be production in Ukraine that is also to help Ukraine become sustainable, but we'll also get a kickback strategically, strategically from that, whereby Ukraine are giving us expertise. They are using these on the front line. And if we're working in cooperation with them, then we can use that expertise. They can train us going forward. We can learn, we can get all the data feedback from how drones are being used and what capabilities work and how, etc., etc. Because going forward, any nation will want to have the best army that they can possibly have, using the best equipment that they can, and having that equipment used as effectively as possible. And there's no better testbed than an actual war. So the help that we give Ukraine, or any country gives Ukraine, is is also as much about improving our own capabilities and our own understanding of war. There will be so much data processing and data swapping, sharing, extraction, all sorts of stuff going on where NATO nations and our allied nations are going to be improving their own military position going forward. Not just in terms of, say the US giving their old equipment and buying new equipment for themselves, and that's upgrading their own military hardware, but also in the design and the feedback loops and everything to do with new equipment or the application of equipment. So even like the use of Bradleys that are old bits of kit, relatively speaking, how they are being used on the front line, and then learning and seeing and saying, right, we can learn from that. There's that analysis of that. Those Bradleys that were absolutely like raking the T-90 tank near Avdiivka. Lots of people have done analyses of that. Ryan Macbeth has done analysis of that, but he had to watch a full-length one that shows it, the turret rotating and it going off and crashing into a tree. So in other words, didn't quite see the full success of what was taking place there. But, US military officials will be looking at that footage and going, right, that's how they did that. This is the real terms. This is what happens when we use Bradleys in this way on a front line. Okay, and this is how those rounds worked. Right, let's take that back and let's use that to inform our own, policy decision making or training or use of this or that equipment. Anyway, I digress. Ocean Technical here says, another rare photo of a Polish-supplied SA-3 Neva SC surface-to-air missile system in Ukrainian service, this time of its low-blow engagement radar. The radar seen here was upgraded with new digital components, IFF, and data link capability. Just to say that, there are other launchers that the Ukrainians are using, but also radar capabilities that come with these, all useful, all adding into that network of air defense provision. Right. Finally, and this is somewhat worrying, now for one of possibly two reasons. So MAGA supporters donating money to Russia to kill Ukrainians. So the idea here is, if you want yourself a signed shell with whatever you want, DM me on Twitter. We'll guide you through the process. It will cost you €20 per piece. All funds raised go towards Russian humanitarian aid. According to this Russian fundraiser, a shell is North Korean 122 mil fragmentation fugitive, and he's showing this 122 mil shell with written on it, MAGA Trump 2024 communism. I don't know if it's anti-communism, pro-communism, who knows. Now, whether that has actually been funded by someone who really is a pro-Trump MAGA supporter from the US, who has placed that on a shell to hit the Ukrainians, whether that is someone, literally an American, going, I am pro-Putin, I don't know. It could also be divisive political messaging from Russians to sow that kind of discord so that people like myself go, what are you doing, MAGA, etc., etc. Either way, the second way is very cynical and clever. The first way is really bloody worrying. Either way, that's worrying because that the Russians are aligning themselves with MAGA, with Trump. They want Trump to win like they did in 2020 and like they did in 2016. We know that's factual. We know that the Russians wanted into, you listen to any propagandists on Russian TV, they will tell you that. This is not controversial. That's not to invalidate Trump as a politician necessarily, right? Although I think it also does, but it doesn't necessarily do that. You can be doing the right thing and having nefarious actors want you to do that, right? I just think Trump isn't doing the right thing, and that is why nefarious actors want him to do that, want him to succeed. It's just very divisive as well of politics in the US at the moment, so they are going to naturally the Russians will want to sow as much discord as possible. Right, okay. Turkish Parliament, and I think this is happening today actually, are to ratify Sweden's NATO accession bid. Says possibly on Tuesday. I think it is happening today. That would be incredible. Now, I don't know what will go on because I believe the Swedish have been invited to Hungary to meet with the Hungarians to talk about this as well. So I don't know if it's plain sailing after Turkey ratify Sweden's accession, because Hungary, I think, have been talking about not letting them join NATO. Polish Prime Minister Tusk has spoken sharply about the demonstration of a policy of neutrality by some leaders of the European Union and member states against the backdrop of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So this is very strong rhetoric from Donald Tusk. Today, anyone in the free world who pretends to be neutral. Interesting. So that's possibly talking about Global South, possibly talking about random other nations, but maybe having a pop at Switzerland, maybe having a pop at Austria, maybe having a pop at, I don't know, Ireland or something as well. Today, anyone in the free world pretends to be neutral, maintains an even distance or demonstrates it towards Ukraine and Russia deserves the darkest place in political hell. That's really strong rhetoric there. So that's what he said while speaking today on January 22nd. During a briefing as part of his visit to the Ukrainian capital, he addressed EU leaders who have not fully understood what the fight is about and what the stakes are. He says, today, anyone in the free world who pretends to be neutral, maintains an equal distance or demonstrates it towards Ukraine and Russia deserves the darkest place in political hell. You are not, and then he says to Ukraine, you are not alone, even in the sense that this struggle is taking place in every European country. It's also worth noting that he's announced that his country has joined the Vilnius Declaration of the G7 regarding security guarantees for Ukraine, and has also announced the appointment of a government envoy from Poland for the restoration of Ukraine. So there's a formal envoy for that role. Good stuff from Poland. Great to see the new government stepping up and going straight to going to Ukraine and delivering rhetoric. And we just hope that aid package matches that rhetoric. Now, talking about the lack of Russian. Actually, no, we won't go there because let's stay on Europe for a start. For the time being, here we have, I don't know, Jabba the Hutt, Mr. Toad, and I don't know, Mr. Unhappy there. I mean, these two men, that's the leader of Hungary, Viktor Orban, again to mention Trump, who said was a great leader, really strong. He loves a dictator, does old Donald. And Robert Fico, who is apparently, seems that he is emulating the Orban way of doing things, and he's trying to take Slovakia in that same direction. These two are problem people in Ukraine. I love that photo. It's just like says all I need to know about those two humans, I guess. No, Orban, Fico. Right, now moving on to Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan, as many of these nations in Eurasia, the Caucasus, and whatever, firmly under the sphere of influence, or in the sphere of influence of Russia. But more recently, Russia seems to be losing their grip on the region at large. Oops. Too much talking, not enough tea. So there's this growing move for these nations to move away from Russia. We've got Armenia and Azerbaijan having their contretemps reignited, and Armenia moving away from Russia, Azerbaijan cementing their sort of move away, but also Kazakhstan saying and doing things that definitely appear to represent a move towards the West and away from from Russia. Kazakhstan bans Russian propagandist Tina Kandelaki from entering the country. This was stated by the representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan, Aybek Smadyarov. I think they'd also been shutting down some of the TV propaganda there as well. Russian TV propaganda is at Kazakhstan, certainly happening in other places. Director of TNT TV channel criticised the decision of the Kazakh authorities to rename railway stations in the Kazakh language. and then called Kazakh people mankurt, which I presume is an insult. Quote, as the experience of the Baltics shows, this is a very dangerous trend. Here too, everything started small and then turned into a real snowball. They closed Russian schools, removed Soviet monuments, banned the Russian language, and finally kicked pensioners out into the cold, Kendelaki wrote. In other words, so she's not allowed back into Kazakhstan for saying stuff like that, but actually what she's saying is definitely needs to be taken into account. So in the Baltics, indeed, that is the way that it went. Of course, it went that way because Russia, right? So Kazakhstan is starting those small moves towards possibly where the Baltics are now. And I think that is very revealing. There you go. Make of that what you will. Now, Bill Browder, who is, I advise you go and watch his TED Talk on YouTube. He is self-proclaimed, most hated, Putin's biggest enemy or whatever. He's one behind the Magnitsky Act. As his lawyer, unfortunately, ended up dying in prison as a result of, the Russian regime. But him, anyway, saying that Apple agrees to pay $12.3 million to the Russian budget, which will now be used to kill Ukrainians. Why is Apple still doing business in Russia? Very good point. I can safely say I don't use Apple, so I'm all right, Jack. I wonder how I'd feel if I did, though. Apple pays $12.3 million fine to Moscow antitrust regulator. Apple has paid 1.18 billion rubles fine. So they're paying this fine to Russia. Rather than saying, we ain't paying this fine, we ain't paying anything to you because you guys suck, and then pulling out of Russia, they say, yeah, we'll pay a fine to you. After a court in Moscow found a US tech giant guilty of abusing its dominant market position on the App Store, Russia's anti-monopoly watchdog announced on Monday. And of course, there may be very good reason why they got that fine. The money used in the payment will go directly to the Russian budget, the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service said. The money will boost the Kremlin's coffers at a time when President Vladimir Putin's government is raising all the funds it can to support record defense spending on its war effort in Ukraine. Apple did not immediately respond to a request for comments. This is a typical issue that Apple has, but it's one that's more galling when you know that money is just going straight into the general Russian coffers, which will, a third of that most certainly is going to the war effort because a third of the Russian budget is being spent on the war. And then here we have Finland has established a parliamentary group to support Belarus, becoming the 24th country to set up a group dedicated to cooperating with the Belarusian democratic movement. So a lot of Belarusian politicians are in exile. So Lukashenko is effectively a dictator now that has been propped up. He was put in position by Putin as a result of the last, scare quotes, election. It wasn't looking like he was going to get in, and Putin essentially put him in. So there are a lot of people in Belarus who would like to be like Ukraine in a position of being able to fulfill their democratic intentions, but they can't because of the way it is. And so there's this democratic movement outside of Belarus, but also obviously there's going to be a lot of people inside who need support to put mechanisms in place to at least try and reassert democratic ideals and mechanisms. But country in the same way that Russia will be funding all sorts of things to stamp out democracy inside Belarus. Other nations like Finland here are trying to support the flourishing of democracy, if that is at all possible, given that there's presently a dictatorship ruling the country. Anyway, I think Belarus is super important and often forgotten about quite a lot. It's a neighbor of Ukraine. It hasn't helped Ukraine as much as Putin would want, and that's because Lukashenko knows that if he does send the army in, it'd be deeply unpopular with the Belarusian people. So he's been not helping Putin as much as he can not helping. At the same time, he had his foreign minister murdered by Putin last year. Was it last year or was it in 2022? For not towing the Kremlin party line. And so Lukashenko knows, he's been very publicly warned and privately warned that you are next if you don't do what we say. So he's in that rock and a hard place where he doesn't want to help Putin that much because he recognizes the reality on the ground. But if he doesn't help Putin enough, he will literally die. And that's a difficult situation. As you know, I despise Lukashenko. He is a dictator, but he's in a difficult place being that dictator. Anyway, that's enough rambling from me. Take care. Speak to you soon. Toodle pips.